Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Very warm welcome to this Monday, 16th January 2023 morning Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam discussion. Today we are reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, entitled The Cosmic Manifestation, Chapter 6, entitled Purusha Sukta Confirmed, Text 1. Before we discuss on this verse, let's sing Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Shri Radhe. Janitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Jaya Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajakacarya Shotru Shatashi Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Isi Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। वृंदावन धाम की जय। मथुरा धाम की जय। जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय। मायापुर धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। सामवेद भक्त वृंद की जय। All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine. Sarvam Shri Krishna Arpanamastu Krishne Matirastu. Hare Krishna. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. The reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 6, Text 1. Brahmovāca. Vācāṁ vahner mukhaṁ kṣetraṁ chandasāṁ sapta dhātavaḥ havya-kavyāmṛtānnānāṁ jihvā sarva-rasasya ca. Brahmovāca. Vācāṁ vahner mukhaṁ kṣetraṁ chandasāṁ sapta dhātavaḥ havya-kavyāmṛtānnānāṁ jihvā sarva-rasasya ca. Brahmovāca. Vācāṁ vahner mukhaṁ kṣetraṁ chandasāṁ sapta dhātavaḥ havya-kavyāmṛtānnānāṁ jihvā sarva-rasasya ca. Word by word. Brahmovāca. Lord Brahma said, Vācāṁ of the voice, vahner of fire, mukhaṁ the mouth, kṣetraṁ the generating center, chandasāṁ of the Vedic hymns such as Gayatri, sapta 7, dhātavaḥ skin and 6 other layers, havya-kavya offerings for the demigods and the forefathers, amrita food for human beings, annānāṁ of all sorts of foodstuffs, jihvā the tongue, sarva all, rasasya of all delicacies, cha also. Translation. Lord Brahma said, the mouth of the virāṭ-puruṣa, the universal form of the Lord, is the generating center of the voice, and the controlling deity is fire. His skin and 6 other layers are the generating centers of the Vedic hymns, and his tongue is the productive center of different foodstuffs and delicacies for offering to the demigods, the forefathers, and the general mass of people. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Isi Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. The opulences of the universal form of the Lord are described herein. It is said that his mouth is the generating center of all kinds of voices, and its controlling deity is the fire demigod. And his skin and other 6 layers of bodily construction are the representative generating centers of the 7 kinds of Vedic hymns, like the Gayatri. Gayatri is the beginning of all Vedic mantras, and it is explained in the first volume of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Since the generating centers are the different parts of the universal form of the Lord, and since the form of the Lord is transcendental to the material creation, it is to be understood that the voice, the tongue, the skin, etc., suggests that the Lord in his transcendental form is not without them. The material voice, or the energy of taking in foodstuff, is generated originally from the Lord. Such actions are but perverted reflections of the original reservoirs. The transcendental situation is not without spiritual variegatedness. In the spiritual world, all the perverted forms of material variegatedness are fully represented in their original spiritual identity. The only difference is that material activities are contaminated by the 3 modes of material nature, whereas the potencies in the spiritual world are all pure because they are engaged in the unalloyed transcendental loving service of the Lord. In the spiritual world, the Lord is the sublime enjoyer of everything, and the living entities there are all engaged in his transcendental loving service without any contamination of the modes of material nature. The activities in the spiritual world are without any of the difficulties of the material world, but there is no question of impersonal voidness on the spiritual platform, as suggested by the impersonalists. Devotional service is defined in the Narada Pancharatra as follows: Sarvopadhi vinirmuktam tatparatvena nirmalam hrishikena hrishikesha sevanam bhaktir uchyate. Originally, since all the senses are produced of the Lord's reservoir of senses, the sensual activities of the material world are to be purified by the process of devotional service. And thus, the perfection of life can be attained simply by purifying the present position of our material activities. And the purifying process begins from the stage of being liberated from the conception of different designations. Every living entity is engaged in some sort of service, either for the self or for the family or for the society, country, etc. But unfortunately, all such services are rendered due to material attachment. The attachments of the material affinity may be simply changed to the service of the Lord. And thus, the treatment of being freed from material attachment begins automatically. The process of liberation is therefore easier through devotional service than by any other methods. For in the Bhagavad Gita 12.5, it is said that one is subjected to various kinds of tribulations if one is impersonally attached. Klesho adhikaras tesham avyaktasakta chandasāṁ. Before we discuss on this verse, let's offer some prayers. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Shreshtham Manamapi Shachiputram Matra Swarupam Rupam Tasyagrajam Murupurim Mathurim Goshthavati Radha Kundam Girivaram Maho Radhika Madhavasham Prapso Yasya Pratita Kripaya Shri Gurum Tam Natosmi Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Adadandastrinam Dante Damyachah Punaha Punaha Shriman Rupa Padambhojam Thulisyam Janma Janmani. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpa Tarobhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, text, chapter 6, text 1. brahmovāca vācāṁ vahner mukhaṁ kṣetraṁ chandasāṁ sapta dhātavaḥ havya-kavyāmṛtānnānāṁ jihvā sarva-rasasya cha. Lord Brahma said, the mouth of the virāṭ-puruṣa, the universal form of the Lord, is the generating center of the voice, and the controlling deity is fire. His skin and 6 other layers are generating centers of the Vedic hymns, and his tongue is the productive center of different foodstuffs and delicacies for offering to the demigods, the forefathers, and the general mass of people. So the discussion is continuing from the previous chapter, where Narada Muni was asking Brahmaji about how the universe was created and who is the cause of this universe. And Brahmaji is giving the description of the universal form of the Lord, the virāṭ-puruṣa. So this is the transcendental universal form of the Lord who is causing everything in the material world to happen. Yasyaika nishvasita kalam-athāvalambya jivanti loma vilaja jagadandanath Vishnur mahan sa iha yasya kala vishesho Govinda madhi-puruṣam tamaham bhajami. It is mentioned in Brahma Samhita, again by Lord Brahmaji. He mentions how this whole creation starts. The start of the creation is when the Mahavishnu form, the Karano-dakshaya Vishnu. Karana means cause. So Karana-dakshaya Vishnu is laying in the causal ocean. And when he is breathing out, innumerable universes are coming out. Yasyaika nishvasita kalam athavalambya jivanti loma vilaja jagadandanath. Vishnur mahan. So Mahavishnu is sa iha yasya kala vishesho. Ite chamsha kala pumsa. Krishnastu bhagavan swayam. Indrari vyakulam lokam mridayanti yuge yuge. So it is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam how Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. And he has got this Purusha avataras, Guna avataras, the different kinds of incarnations that the Supreme Personality of Godhead Sri Krishna has. So in the Purusha avatara, we have the Karano-dakshaya Vishnu, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and Kshirodakshaya Vishnu. So the Karano-dakshaya Vishnu is bringing out all the universes. Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is present as the ruler of those different universes. And from the navel of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu comes Lord Brahma. And there are innumerable Brahmas in all the multitude of universes. And then Kshirodakshaya Vishnu is the Paramatma aspect. So Andantarastham Paramanu Chayantarastham. Govinda madhi-puruṣam tamaham bhajami. So the Lord is present in the nucleus of every atom, literally. And he is also present in the heart of all the living entities. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishta mattah smritir jnanam apohanam cha. Vedaischa sarve rahameva vedyo vedanta krid vedanta vedeva chaham. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that he is situated in the heart of all the living entities. Sarvasya cha aham hridi sannivishta. I am present in the heart of all the living entities. And from me comes smriti jnanam apohanam, remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. If we are remembering something, that remembrance is coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead situated in the heart. If we have some knowledge, that knowledge is coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead situated in the heart. And if we forget something, that forgetfulness is also coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead situated in our heart. Of course, our remembrance, our knowledge, and our forgetfulness is also dependent on our activities, the activities that we choose to do. Whatever activities we choose to do, those activities gets embedded in our consciousness. It gets embedded. When we say embedded in our consciousness, we are not meaning directly into the consciousness, into the subtle body, which is over the consciousness. The subtle body is mind, intelligence, and false ego. Ahankaram, mana, buddhi, and ahankara. So Krishna mentions there are 8, he has got his 8 separated energies: the earth, water, fire, air, sky, mind, intelligence, and false ego. So the mind, intelligence, and false ego, especially the mind, is chitta. It is storing all the impressions of activities that we are involved in. So if we are involved in the activities that help us to remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, the mind is enveloped with that consciousness, Krishna consciousness. And when the mind is in Krishna consciousness, and if a person is leaving the body at that time, yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajati ante kalevaram tam tam nivaiti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavita anta kale cha mam eva smaran muktva kalevaram ya prayati samad bhavam yati nasti atra samshaya. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that at the time of death, anta kale cha mam eva, if someone is remembering me only, smaran, remembering, muktva kalevaram, at the time of leaving the body, the living entity is leaving the body. Smaran muktva kalevaram yah prayati samad bhavam yati nasti atra samshaya. Such a person will attain my nature. There is not even an iota of doubt in that. This is the clear confirmation from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna himself, that at the time of death, if one is remembering the Lord, one will go back home, back to Godhead. How does that remembrance come at the time of death? Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajati ante kalevaram tam tam ivaiti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavita. Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that whatever one remembers during the lifetime the most, that same thought will come at the time of death. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajati ante kalevaram tam tam ivaiti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavita. So that sada tad bhava bhavita is really important, where Krishna says that always one is in that frame of mind, thinking about one particular thing. So our mind, mind gets involved in various activities during the day. So whenever we are doing some activity, there are some activities where the mind is not needed. Those activities which are involuntary kind of activities. When we are doing, the mind is not needed there. Some kind of mechanical activity that we are doing. So at that time, the mind will be not, or the mind could be in the activity that we are doing, or the mind, because the activity is just going on mechanically, the mind might not be in that activity. If the mind is not in that activity, where is the mind going to? That should be the question asked. So what is the default location that the thoughts are going to? Can we make the default location the remembrance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his activities? If we can do that, if we can, at every, whenever the mind is going somewhere, if we can, yadyat manas chanchalam asthiram tad niyamyaitat atmanyeva vasham nayet. Krishna yadyat nischarati manas chanchalam asthiram. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita about how what is happening in the mind. It is yadyat nischarati manas chanchalam asthiram. Wherever the mind is going, asthiram, chanchala. So chanchalam hi mana Krishna pramati balvat dhridam tasyaham nigraham manya vayuriva sudushkaram. As Arjuna says, Arjuna, even though he is Gudakesha, he has conquered the sleep, but he actually says that he confesses to Krishna that the mind is very flickering. It is obstinate. And to control it is even difficult than controlling the wind. So Krishna mentions that abhyasena to kaunteya vairagyane cha gruhyate asamshayam mahabaho manodurnigraham chalam abhyasena to kaunteya vairagyane cha gruhyate. So Krishna mentions that undoubtedly, Arjuna, yes, O mighty armed Arjuna, this mind is really difficult to control, but through practice and renunciation it can be controlled. Abhyasena to kaunteya vairagyane cha gruhyate. And what is that practice? Practice Krishna mentions. Yadyad nischarati manaschanchalam astiram tatas tata nyamyaitat atmanyeva vasham nayet. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna that whenever the mind is going to different other places, first of all, notice that it is going to that place and then bring it back. Atmanyeva vasham nayet. Bring it back to the self. And what is the self? The self is, as Krishna mentions, mama eva amsha jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. So the self is an eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when we say eternal part and parcel, it is actually eternal part and parcel. What does that mean? It means that in the original sense, the living entity is never separated from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The living entity is always connected with the Supreme Personality of Godhead at every moment. So what the need is for the mind to actually come back and understand that that is the real situation. But what happens is, because the mind is always preoccupied with all the material activities and material pursuits, mind does not come back to its original source and be situated in that original source. When the mind is situated in the original source, one actually realizes that I am never disconnected from Krishna. I'm always connected to Krishna. And that's why the process of spiritual journey is called the process of self-realization, God realization. Why is it called self-realization and God realization? Because it's not that it is something that is external and I'm going far away to attain it. Absolutely not. It is within the core of us. The love for the Lord is there within the core and within the pores. Each and every pore of the existence, the love for the Lord is present. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabo Noy. Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karayo Uday. So that is the Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema. That is the eternally Nitya Siddha. It is an eternal perfection. What is the eternal perfection? That is Krishna Prema, the love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna. And it's not something that has to be, that we have to go out and attain. Kasturi kundal base mrg dhunde ban mahi. Aise ghatkat ram hai khojat fir hai kahi. There is a poet who says this. He talks about this musk scent which comes from a gland in the deer. And this musk scent, even though it is within the gland of the deer thinks that it is somewhere far. So it is running everywhere across the forest trying to find where that scent is coming from. Unfortunately, not knowing that the scent is within the deer itself. And that exactly is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna. His Durastam Chantikete Chat. So Krishna, he if one wants to keep him the farthest, he's at the farthest place. But if one wants to keep him at the most closest, he's at the closest place. So this is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it is our love for the Lord that is the most important aspect. Prema pumartho mahan. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentions about that. So he says, Ramya kachid upasana vrajavadho argenava kalpita. Prema pumartho mahan. Aradhya bhagwan vrajesha tanaya tad dhamam vrindavanam. Ramya kachid upasana vrajavadho argenaya kalpita. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam amalam puranam. Prema pumartho mahan. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu matam idam tatradhara napara. So this is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's few of his wonderful statements. So the first statement that he says is Aradhya Bhagwan Vrajesh Tanaya. That the actual loving Lord is the Lord of Vrindavana, Shri Krishna, who is the son of the Vraja Isha. He is the son of Nanda Maharaj, who is the king of the Vrindavan. Vrajesha Tanaya, son of the king of Vrindavan. Who is the worshipable Lord? The son of king of Vrindavan, Vrajesha Tanaya. Where does he stay? Tad dhamam Vrindavanam. He stays in Vrindavan. Ramya kachid upasana vrajavadhu argena kalpita. How should one worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the son of Nanda Maharaj, who is the king of Vrindavan, who stays in Vrindavan? As the gopis of Vrindavana worshipped the Supreme Lord. How did the gopis of Vrindavana worship the Supreme Lord? Whatever activities they were engaged in, their mind was always focused on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They were always singing the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They were engaged in, they were householders, they were housewives, Ramya, the gopis. But their mind, they were simple. And that is the quality of someone who is surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is no complications, no complexities. It's simple. So arjavam. So that is what it's in Sanskrit. Satyam samadama titiksha jnana vijnanam astikyam arjavam brahma karma svabhavajam. So this is titikshava karunika suhridam sarvadehinam ajata shatrava shanta sadhavo sadhubhushana. So it is mentioned about what are the qualities of a person who is surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One of the qualities is forbearance, titikshava, karunika, being costlessly merciful to all the living entities, being the best friend of all the living entities, suhridam sarvadehinam, ajata shatrava. For such a person, an enemy has not been born. Shanta, totally peaceful. And these are the qualities of the person who is surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we see, so this is the Aradhya Bhagavan Vrajeshatanaya Tad Dhamam Vrindavanam Ramya Kachid Upasana Vrajavadu Argenava Kalpitha Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Amalam Puranam Prema Pumartho Mahan. So the significance of engaging in hearing and chanting of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is mentioned in that. It is the spotless Purana, it is said. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Amalam Puranam, the most purified Purana. Prema Pumartho Mahan. And then it is said that the real transcendental activity is loving the Lord. So we have got this Chatur Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So one does religious activities, Dharma, and then one engages in economic development, which is Artha. Then through the economic development, one does Kama, sensual enjoyment. And after that, one is trying for Moksha, liberation. So this is called the Purusharthas. Especially in the human form of life, these Purusharthas are available. Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. But Prema, the love for the Lord, is transcending all the Chatur Purusharthas. So Srila Prabhupada actually mentions in the purport. So this purport is actually mentioning how the mouth of the virāṭ-puruṣa, the universal form of the Lord, is generating the center of the voice. And the controlling deity is fire. So whatever voices are coming, it is due to the presence of the virāṭ-puruṣa. And the controlling deity is the fire. Because without that fire being present, there is no heat. And without heat, everything will get frozen. Basically, there will be no life. That is the importance of fire, literally. And then his skin and 6 other layers are the generating centers of the Vedic hymns. And his tongue is the productive center of different foodstuffs and delicacies for offering to the demigods, the forefathers, and the general mass of people. So here the virāṭ-puruṣa, it's mentioned about the universal form of the Lord. And the most important thing is the form. It is mentioned about the form. And that's why Srila Prabhupada stresses in the purport about how there is this verse in Shri Ishopanishad as well. Hiranmayena patrena satyasya apahita mukhaṁ tattvam pusham apavurunu satya dharmaya drishtai. So it is mentioned in Shri Ishopanishad that the devotee, the pure devotee of the Lord, is praying that, "O Lord, please remove your glaring effulgence so that we can see your transcendental face." So this, what happens is, one thinks that because in this material body there is suffering, one thinks that without having body, having no body is the end of suffering. But what one does not realize is that in the spiritual world, there is no difference between the body and the actual spirit soul. So there is nothing material in the spiritual world. Avajananti ma mudha manushim tanmashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram, as Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita. And therefore, the same logic is given by impersonalists when Krishna himself comes. So when Krishna comes, The impersonalists are saying that Krishna is coming with a material body. Again, the same logic is being applied. That if there is body, then it has to be matter. There cannot be a concept of spiritual body. Why not? Why cannot there be variegatedness after liberation? Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, Urdhva Moolam Adhashakha, Ashwatham Prahuravyayam Chandamsi Yasya Parnani, Yastam Veda Sa Vedavet. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, what is material world? So he says that in the material world, the roots are at the top and the branches are at the bottom. Urdhva Moolam Adhashakha, Ashwatham Prahuravyayam Chandamsi Yasya Parnani, Yastam Veda Sa Vedavet. So it is like a banyan tree. If we have seen the banyan tree, we can see that it's huge. When a banyan tree grows, it's really huge. The growth is just amazing. And then the root is coming from the top, and then the root goes down, and then it again, the tree just keeps on expanding itself. That is a banyan tree. And that is what is mentioned about this material world. Because in the material world, this cycle of birth and death is constantly continuing. It is just why it is continuing, because one thinks that the only enjoyment is in this material body. There is no other enjoyment. So if one is and those few moments of so-called happiness turns into distress. Yastad agre vishamiva pariname amrutopamam tat sukham satvikam prokta atma jnana prasadaja. And there is a different kind of happiness. That different kind of happiness is, initially it might feel as poison, but in the end, in the long term, it is like a nectar. And that happiness is in the mode of goodness. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita about that. The other happiness, which is, so there are two words used in the Vedic terms. One is called Shreya and one is called Preya. So Shreya is that which helps in the long-term growth of the person. And Preya is something that is, in the short term, it might feel good, but in the long term, it is not. Srila Prabhupada gives the example of the kid going to study. It's just an example to understand. So if the kid is interested in just playing and no studying at all, if that type of a kid is asked to go to a school, that kid will say that, no, I want to play, because I get more enjoyment out of playing. I don't get that much enjoyment out of studying. So what does the parent do? The parent would try and cajole the kid in somehow or other, bringing them to the educational institute. So initially the kid might not like it. But later when the kid grows up, they understand that because I got the education, I'm able to do a lot of things. So that is the example that Srila Prabhupada gives in terms of understanding the short-term so-called enjoyment and the long-term happiness, the difference, the Preya and Shreya. Yash Shreyasyan Nishchitam Bruhitan me, Shishyasteham Sadimam Tvam Prapannam. Karpanya dosho apahata swabhava, Prachami Tvam Dharma Sammuda Cheta. Yash Shreyasyan Nishchitam Bruhitan me, Shishyasteham Sadimam Tvam Prapannam. This is said by Arjuna to Krishna. So Arjuna initially gives lots of arguments to Krishna, saying that I don't want to involve in this battle of Kurukshetra. I don't want to fight. But after giving all the arguments, at a point he realizes that if I continue like this arguing, I'm not going to go to any conclusion. We are not going to, so it will just be a status quo. We'll continuously keep arguing for eternity, basically. So then Arjuna realizes this, and then he says that, oh Krishna, I really think that I don't know what to do at this time. Now please tell me what is the most beneficial in the long term for me. That is Shreyan. Yes, Shreyasyan Nishchitam Bruhitanme. Please tell it for sure, definitely. What is the long term benefit for me? Now I am your disciple, Shishyasteham Sadhi Mam Tvam Prapannam. I am surrendered unto you. So this is, Arjuna says this, and then Krishna says, Ashocyan anavashocastum prajñavadamscha bhashase gatasun agatasumscha nanushocanti pandita. Immediately Krishna says that you are lamenting for something that does not require lamentation. You're speaking as if you are a wise person. Prajñavadamscha bhashase. A really learned person, gatasun agatasumscha nanushocanti pandita, does not lament for either a living or a dead person. It's a why? Because na jayate mriyate va kadachit nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuya ajo nityam shashvatoyam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire achedyohem maddahyohem makledyo ashoshevacha nitya sarvagata sthanu achaloyam sanātana. Because that is what all the living entities are. They are eternal. This is, the body is just like a cloth that the living entities are wearing. Vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya navani grananti naroprani tatha shariraya vihaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that just like a person takes off the old cloth and puts on a new cloth, similarly the living entity takes off the old body and puts on a new body. This is a beginning of spiritual life. When we understand our eternal position as someone who is not dependent on birth and death, who is not dependent on all these things that are coming in from the senses. So the senses are constantly being attached to the sense objects. Vishya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita how, and this param drishtva nivartate is extremely important, because unless there is higher taste, lower taste cannot be given up. What is the higher taste? The higher taste is our absorption in chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Our absorption in being situated within the self. And so when that absorption is there, and when the taste for that absorption is there, automatically param drishtva nivartate. Sukham atyantikam yattad buddhi grahyam atindriyam yat veti yatra na chaivayam sthitas chalati tatvata. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that one gets a kind of happiness, sukham atyantikam yattad buddhi grahyam atindriyam. Atindriyam. That is the word. That is a very important word there. In that verse, Krishna mentions that kind of happiness which transcends the happiness of the senses. So generally the happiness of the senses is based on the mind being floating from one thing to another, one thing to another, one thing to another. That is the happiness of the senses. But the happiness that transcends the senses is that happiness where the concentration is focused on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And is it hard to focus the concentration on Supreme Personality of Godhead? Depends on the person. The person is attached to hearing about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's why it is said, Dharma svanushrita pumsan vishvakshena kathasvaya notpadiyat ratim yadi shrama eva hi kevalam. It is said that one might be doing one's activities very nicely, all the religious duties and everything else, but if one does not develop attachment about hearing about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishvakshena kathasvaya notpadiyat ratim yadi, attachment, then it is shrama eva hi kevalam. It is said that it is just a hard labor. Why? Why is it a hard labor? Because there is the person is basically in that chatur purusharthas mode. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. And what kind of moksha is this? This moksha is what is mentioned. What is mentioned there? Ye anya arvindaksha vimukta maninas tvayasta bhavad avishuddha buddhaya aruya krichena param padam tata patanti ada nadrita yushmadaram angraya. So as it is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, it is mentioned that if one is going in the direction of impersonal liberation, which that kind of moksha, one might reach the Param Padam. One might reach the stage of Brahma. Aham Brahmasmi, but unfortunately one falls down, patanti adha. And this is said by Vedavyasa himself. Why? Because anadrita yushmad angraya. Because one did not recognize the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is, and therefore Srila Prabhupada very clearly mentions here about the understanding of spiritual variegatedness. That the material variegatedness is a reflection, perverted reflection of the spiritual variegatedness. That is what Krishna mentions, Urdhva Moolam Adha Shakha. Where do we see the roots at the top and the branches at the bottom? Which place do you see? We see it in the reflection, in a river. So if a tree is on the banks of a river, and if we look at the river, we'll see that the branch of the tree is so the root of the tree is at the top and the branch is at the bottom. So this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world, and therefore the spiritual world also has got variegatedness. So when we hear this verse where it is mentioned about vācāṁ, vahner, mukhaṁ, kṣetraṁ, Lord Brahma said the mouth of the virāṭ-puruṣa, the universal form of the Lord, is the generating center of the voice. Chandasāṁ, sapta, dhātavaḥ. And the controlling deity is fire. His skin and 6 other layers are generating centers of the Vedic hymns. And Srila Prabhupada mentions about the Gayatri mantra as well. So the dhimahi, when the Gayatri mantra generally has got this word dhimahi. Dhimahi means I am meditating upon. My mind and my intelligence is focused upon. Satyam param dhimahi. So in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the first verse, Janmadhyasya to anvayadi taratascha arteshu abhignas virāṭ tene brahma hridaya adikave muhyanti yat suraya tejo varim hridam yatha vinmaya dhamna svena sada nirasta kuhakam satyam param dhimahi. So the last words are called, I meditate upon the supreme absolute truth. That is Gayatri. So Om Bhur-bhuvah swaha tatsavitur varenyam bhargo devasya dhimahi dhiyo yonah prachodayat. So this is the Gayatri mantra for the sun god. So this is dhiyo yonah prachodayat. So make my intelligence as effulgent as yourself, O sun god. So when our intelligence is effulgent, we understand which direction to take, which is the best direction. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritam gamaya. As it is mentioned in the Vedic scriptures, lead me from the falsehood to the truthhood, the ignorance to knowledge. Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma, from death to immortality. This can be done only in the human form of life. It cannot be done in any other form of life. Nrideham adyam sulabham sudurlabham. So it is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam that this human form of life is sulabham sudurlabham. In this, it's called sulabham, easy, because in this form one can come out of the cycle of birth and death. That's why it is sulabham. But it is sudurlabham. It is very rare. Nrideham adyam sulabham sudurlabham plavam sukalpam gurukarnadharam. So this body, the human body, is like the boat that is helping us to cross the ocean of birth and death. The spiritual master is the captain of that boat, of the ship. And the Lord is giving us the wind in the right direction so that the ship or the boat can cross over the ocean of birth and death. Mayanukolena nabhasvateritam puman bhavadbhiya na taret sa atmaha. If all these wonderful conditions are there to cross over the ocean of birth and death, if one does not take advantage of that, unfortunately one is missing out on the most important activity that can be done in the human form of life. So Srila Prahlad Maharaj also says this. He says, Kaumaram acharet prajñam dharman bhagavataniya durlabham manusham janmam tadapi adhrovam artadam. So that's why he says that the activity of this Bhagavata Dharma, about hearing and chanting about Krishna, Shrinvatam Swakatha Krishna, Punya Shravana Kirtana, Hridyantasto hi abhadrani vidunoti suhrutshatam. Satam prasangat mama virya samvido bhavanti hritkarna rasayana kata tajjoshanadashu apavarga vartmani shraddha ratir bhaktir anukramishyati. So this engagement in hearing about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, when that is strong, one realizes that one is eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. All this, Srila Prabhupada mentions, quotes the Narada Pancharatra of Narada Muni. Sarvopadhi vinirmuktam tatparatvena nirmalam. Hrishikena hrishikesha sevanam bhaktiruchyate. So that is the beginning of devotional service. When the first step in the devotional service is giving up all the designations. Because it is the designations that is attaching us to the body, to all these material layers. So we've got this layer of the body, which is made up of the 5: earth, water, fire, air, and space. And then we have the subtle body, which is the mind, intelligence, and false ego. So it's all matter. All that is matter. Apareyam itastuvanyam vidhime prakritim param jiva bhutam mahabaho yayedam dharyate jagat. But the living entity, the dehi, the proprietor of the body within the body, is the real personality. This personality, which is the body and the mind and the false ego, it is temporary. It is totally based on matter. That's why it is material. If the spark, the living spark, is not there, the whole nothing works. It's like we could give an example of electricity or a battery in an appliance. We could have a lot of different appliances or different phones and laptops and all the other different microwaves and washing machines and so many other things. But if there is no electricity, nothing will work. Or if appliance is working on battery, the battery also needs to be charged. If the battery has no charge, it will not work. So it is exactly all this, the body and the mind and the intelligence and the false ego, everything can be there. But if the living spark is not there, it is dead. This understanding can happen only in human form of life. And when this understanding happens, one is in that state of sarva upadhi vinirmuktam. One gives up all the designations then, because one knows that this designation is temporary. One could be president of a country, a very famous president of the country for decades and decades. But if the body is given up, one does not know that what is going to happen to that living entity after one gives up that body of the most famous president for decades and decades. It's such a precarious condition, which is unfortunately present, and it is because the living entity has chosen to remain in that precarious condition. It's a choice. So the living entity can choose to think about this, to internalize these important realities, and then go in the direction of getting attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or the living entity can choose to ignore it. And that is what ignorance is. Ignorance is ignoring the reality. What is reality? Mamupetya punarjanmam dukkhalayam ashashvatam. The reality is that we are eternal, but unfortunately we are identifying ourselves with temporary things. So it is a mismatch. But if we identify ourselves with eternal, we are eternal and we identify ourselves with another eternal, there is no mismatch. And when there is no mismatch, there is bliss. And we realize our original position as Satchidananda. So Krishna is Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is Sri Krishna, and he is an embodiment of eternality, existence, and bliss. truth, knowledge, and bliss. So, as the eternal part and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we are also the same. Or we could say we are similar. We cannot say we are exactly the same, because the living entity is the living entity has to always attach itself with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If it does not attach itself with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is the tendency of getting attached to the material world. And when there is attachment to the material world, then there is this constant cycle of birth and death. So that's why Srila Prabhupada here quotes this Narada Pancharatra verse, that one has to give up all the designations, sarva upadi vinirmuktam. Then one knows one's original pure state, tat paratvena nirmalam. And when one knows one's pure state, then rishikena rishikesha sevana. One engages one's senses in the service of the master of the senses. And then when that happens, that is bhakti. And it's again a cycle which is helping us to come out of the cycle of birth and death. So it's up to the living entity to choose what cycle one wants to be in. Whether one wants to be in the cycle of birth and death, constantly going through the unfortunate situation of janma mrityu jara vyadhi. So when there is birth and death, in between one has to somehow or other get some kind of diseases, and then one has to grow old. So these two are, even a person could be billionaire and they could have lots and lots of resources, but they cannot avoid disease, old age, and death. Diseases probably can be somehow avoided to a large extent. Or if a disease comes immediately, one has lots of money and one can go to the best doctor and get resolved. But the root of the cause is not gone. The root of the cause is one's attachment to the material world. And how does one get detached from the material world? When one knows one's original position as an eternal part and parcel of the Lord, and in that knowledge, one surrenders onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matta sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvita. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, when one knows that Krishna is the cause of everything, sarvasya prabhava, everything is coming from Krishna. When one knows this 100%, iti matva, then what does one do? Bhajante mam. One engages in loving devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And who is such a person? Buddha, a person in knowledge. And how does such a person engage in loving devotional service? Bhava samanvita, with full emotion. Because that is the only thing that we can give to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everything else is the Lord's. But our emotions are also the Lord's in a way. Because when one is surrendering onto the Lord, everything is Lord's. Even if one is not surrendering, it is Lord's. But in surrender, one realizes that it is Lord's. And when one realizes that everything is Lord's, there is this sense of bhoktaram yagya tapasam sarvalokam aishwaram suhridam sarvabhutanam gyatva mam shanti muchyati. When one realizes that Krishna is the actual proprietor, so there is a peace, because the living entity can then become totally detached, because living entity is not owning anything. It is when this sense of ownership is there, then all this attachment and everything is coming up. But when we say that Krishna is the owner, which is the reality, so then there is no attachment. Attachment comes from this sense of ownership. And this sense of ownership comes from the presence of false ego. Ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha. So actually, all the activities are being done in the different modes of nature. We are in mode of goodness. We are getting together and trying to hear Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. In mode of passion, we're going out and trying to accumulate a lot of material things for enjoyment. In the mode of ignorance, we're totally lazy and indolent. So this cycle is continuously going. So and that's what the living entity in the material body is. They are under the influence of the three modes of material nature. But when the living entity knows and is in that state of one's original constitutional position, then one transcends the modes of material nature. And that, so Srila Prabhupada actually mentions here, the process of liberation is therefore, we can conclude the discussion here with this conclusion from Srila Prabhupada. The process of liberation is therefore easier through devotional service than by any other means. For in the Bhagavad Gita 12.5, it is said that one is subjected to various kinds of tribulations if one is impersonally attached. Klesho adhikaras tesham avyaktasakta chetasam avyakto hi gatir dukkham dehavadbhir avapyate. So it is mentioned in that verse that if one is attached to the impersonal aspect, then even to get to the state of liberation, so-called liberation, is difficult. And after getting there, unfortunately, one falls down as well. So the best and the most kaler dosha nidhe rajan hi asti eko mahadgunan kirtana deva krishnasya mukta sangha param vrajet. So even in this age of Kali, the best recommendation is, in this age of Kali has got lots and lots of, unfortunately, things that distract one from one's original constitutional position. So how one can come back? Kirtana deva krishnasya. When one is chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. Concentrating on the sound vibrations, transcendental sound vibrations, one becomes totally free from all attachments, mukta sangha, and one goes back home, back to Godhead. With that, I would like to conclude this discussion. The verse brahmovāca, vācāṁ, vahner, mukhaṁ, kṣetraṁ, chandasāṁ, sapta, dhātavaḥ, havya-kavyāmṛtānnānāṁ, jihvā, sarva-rasasya. Lord Brahma said, the mouth of the virāṭ-puruṣa, the universal form of the Lord, is generating center of the voice, and the controlling deity is fire. His skin and 6 other layers are the generating centers of the Vedic hymns, and his tongue is the productive center of different foodstuffs and delicacies for offering to the demigods, the forefathers, and the general mass of the people. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Sarvam Shri Krishnarpanamastu Krishne Matirastu. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.